Hello, this is Stefano with Stefano's Espresso Care. I suppose it's time to show what we do when we start to rebuild a Pavoni lever machine. This is a pre-Millennium. You can tell by the shape of the group head, so there won't be a sleeve inside. So the first thing I normally do is to loosen the upper nuts, 14 millimeter. The pins are normally located with a E-clip. You can use a dental tool, which next time that you get overcharged by your dentist, ask if he has any old one. Or they make fancy little tools specifically for the job. Or a pin, anything that you can reach it and pull it out. I already did so on the other side. I put them off. I look for wear and tear. This one will need to be replaced. Here there is a spacer. Spacer gets put out of the way as well. This point in time we have access to the group head. With a 10 millimeter, you remove it from the boiler. Interesting, this one has washers, which they are not from factory, so it looks like the customer already attached, modified, opened the group head. Not sure why I thought they were necessary, because normally they are not. What's holding this in place now can be a very squished O-ring. This is normally a round O-ring, is not square squish like this, to be replaced. At this point in time, and make sure I'm centered to the camera. Yes, okay. This point in time, this pipe gets removed and inspected. On newer machine, you will have this pipe inserted on a plastic insert. But what I'm looking for normally are airline cracks. And this machine was previously this scale. And I'll be making sure with a magnifying glass that these are not cracks, which happen when there is not too much flowing down, aka a clogged basket, etc, etc, etc. Then at this point we push the piston out. Like so. Yes, certainly this customer already worked on the machine. These are Cafe Latte silicone gasket. This will need to be cleaned, descaled and scraped from coffee residues. But let's assume that this is ready to be reassembled or disassembled. One of these fancy tools, you remove the E-clip inside, or the C-clip, this one. And here there are two more parts. Washer with rolls and the lip gasket. Pay attention how this gasket gets pulled out, because obviously we need to go back in the same way. Solid side against the group head. Stand by for the next step. While the group head is soaking in some espresso cleaner and a very slight amount of this color, I'll proceed to remove the steam valve shaft. This is a 14 millimeter, and you loosen first the counter nut and then you pull the shaft out. Sometimes they are very stuck there, so you might need to pull. Depending on the version of your machine, you might have an Allen head, a screw, or a pushed out pin. This is the pin. Set aside for now. Side glass. A wider flat blade. There is an O-ring in there. And for the record, this machine was already initially this scale to at least remove some initial of the thicker stuff. But most likely it's gonna need another one. We'll see. Loosen these nuts, 17 millimeter, and at this point in time, the side glass will pull out, and most of the time does not. So when this happens, soft plier if you have one, or simply the stream, go into a trash can very safely, break the glass off halfway through, and extract the broken piece, which will be... No, actually I was able to get it. No, not yet. We don't like to put any chemical here and try to loosen it, but potentially, like I say, you can get a plier with soft jaw, and in some cases you are still able to remove it. Just pulling straight out doesn't actually feels loose, so sometimes they will crack right in your face when you're trying to do that. There it goes. This came loose. We'll decide later if we wanted to reuse it or not, but due to the amount of scale and the age of the machine, this is a 1994, most likely I will not. Right here you will have normally brass washer and gasket. This particular machine has been obviously upgraded to the metal side glass fitting. For the age, I think they still used plastic back then, but here is the washer, here is the gasket. Both places. And these are so when you normally punch a nice hole on your finger when they're stuck. So the way that they come out is of course the same way that eventually they go back in. And what I like to do once I remove, also you clean very well. Oops. Go. In many instances, washer gets lost because they get stuck to the gasket, which of course the gasket will be replaced, the washers will just be this scale basically. Clean any debris, blow some air, flow some water through both of the holes, including the steam valve. Stand by. Before I proceed with the rebuild of the upper part of the machine, I normally deal with the guts, and makes it easier without the grouped attach, since you have less weight to deal with. What I have is an angle iron, which I'll be actually offering some on our site pretty soon, cut with the 2 holes drill to match the 2 holes of the grouped, so you can have a firm hole there, as long that you have, of course, a vice bench. This machine obviously has seen better day, so the wiring needs to be redone. The 18 element is gonna get replaced anyway. And I also noticed that indeed this customer did work on this machine previously, or somebody did, because he has bolts. Oh, I guess they refer as screw because they are not screwing into a nut. So technically, even though they are bolt heads, they are referred as screw. And of course, before doing what you're doing, make sure that you are marking all the wires, etc, etc, etc. But what I wanted to show is that guts of what you'll be getting when you get to the 18 element. This is very odd. Somebody used the correct O-ring, even though it's in silicone, instead of a PDM. Doesn't matter that part, but in addition they had extra gasket. I don't think it's even a P7 flat, but whatever they did was obviously an afterthought. I'm looking for the edge. that the edge is nice and smooth. We already checked that the boiler is not swiveling from the base, which that will need to be addressed with a special tool, replacing the spacer if we had to. And as I said previously, this machine was already descaled. I was debating if we might need another descaling section or not, but what we need to do now is to let it dry, and once dry, I'll be able to tell if there is more need for descaling or it is okay leaving it the way it is. So, to recap, we're gonna be rewiring this machine, put a new switch, put a new heating element, then we will go back to the upper part of the machine that will need to be rebuilt. And this is what happens after you let the boiler and the machine dry out a little bit. It will actually show you some scale that with wet component will not actually show as present. And of course, this a lot of time they're flakes and they can get just brush off. Okay, the machine is now entire rewired. A new heating element, a new safety thermostat is being replaced. So is the switch. If you are using a 4-prong heating element and you don't have a multimeter handy, I suppose the easier way to see which coil is which. The larger one is the higher wattage, which will read less resistance if you do have an ohm meter. And the 200 watt, the smaller one, is actually smaller in diameter, and the poles, the terminals, are actually closer to each other, and it will also read higher on the ohm when the testing is done. At this point in time, we are missing just the cover, which it will be clean a little bit, if not entirely replaced. I don't think we need to replace it, just clean it. But there will be the guts rewire and completed. Now we can move back to the front or the top of the machine. Okay, now that the guts are solved, we are moving on to the grouped and the upper part of the machine. Forgot to mention, for whom uses a torque wrench, the 3 screws, the old 18 element, they are about 4 Newton per square inch. I think that's the value. Anyway, 4. I start with the grouped gasket. Of course, piston is clean. Very important, make sure that the shaft is not coming unscrewed from the piston. If so, screw it in super tight, put a glue or double Loctite. The piston insertion. Yes, we have a special tool that does this work, but for me it's just as easier to do it this way. What's important is that you don't pinch them and you make sure that the gasket are going into the groove, like so. In a second I'll be showing you. Always the solid part of the gasket are actually facing in, so at the end of both gasket, piston gasket, they'll be facing each others. And you make sure that the flat part will be exposed. It does happen often that we get contacted by customer that this gasket kind of flipped while positioning, and it is actually, I guess, inside out, you can say. Yeah, I guess inside out. So second gasket, same thing. Sometimes they go in a little quicker, sometimes they don't, but this is fairly easy and simple, like so. So now, inside the grouped, there is, of course, the cleaning now. And sometimes, apart what we can do by hand, we use, I don't even know what this thing are called, but, cleaning sleeves. That's the Italian new name of it. So, at this point in time, we insert the P49. The solid part of it will go inside, so against the metal. So it gets positioned first, push down. There is also a silly tool that will help you sit all the above correctly. Then the washer, same thing, push it down all the way, and then the famous clip that the flying away clip. Make sure you're just going just to the edge of it. Don't go too far in with the tips. Once you know that it's positioned in place, it will actually be moving, rolling. I don't know if I can show it to you, but like so, it will not be pinched. And there is a specific groove, of course, where, can you see it turning? No? Anyway, spins. At this point in time, excuse me the reach, I like to grease a little bit the shaft, food grade grease of course, a little bit just on the edge of the piston chamber, some here, and some on the shaft. I'd say I'm more abundant on the shaft than anything else. At this point in time, normally I position these inside a vise behind me, but for the sake of the video, I'll do it without it. Okay, so you position this, you push down, gets inserted, and this gives you the smoothness going up and down a few times. Now, the real way to know the travel, you start with a lock nut, and I didn't grab a clean shower screen yet, so let me just demonstrate with the old one for now. The shower screen will be replaced, but the way to adjust the travel, I position just the shower screen there. I go up and down a few times. I feel with my thumb when the piston will touch the shower screen. Let's say there. I keep adjusting the counter nut until it does not so anymore, but you want, of course, not to go too far back. So if I had to count the thread on this particular one, you're about 1 thread space from above. And this is on a pre-Millennium group head. This is how much more or less sticks up. Again, this is your judgment right there. Stop it before you can feel it on your finger touching. Once that's achieved, then you can use your nut and the skinny 14mm to lock it in place, so it will not move during the rest of the assembly. The old pipe was chewed up after the cleaning, age, so we are inserting a new one. This older group did not have the plastic insert, so it is actually, I wouldn't call it simpler, but you know, one less piece that can potentially melt and needs to be replaced, hence why we had them made in stainless steel, by the way. So you insert this dude until on this particular older machine the thread actually stops right there when you are perpendicular. Like so. I'm expecting that there is no excessive wear on the traveling area here. The pins will be replaced with new one, and so is the little roller. At this point in time, we're gonna be inserting the shower screen and the group gasket, which I had to go get, so stand by please. Okay, I'm back with the new shower screen and group gasket. For the pre-Millennium, no matter how squished they look through the years, they are always starting round. Part number will be P55. Okay, so this is what I prepare, just like so. And it's easier to do it when your group head is already in your hand rather than try to do it upside down. But I just position these, no sharp tools, and just push my way around. It so require also prefers, if you don't remove this groupet too often, do insert a little food grade grease underneath, not facing up where the portafilter will go, but just underneath. Make sure this O-ring slash groupet gasket is all the way inserted inside the groove, and take your portafilter first without basket, test a few times just to make sure it's fully seated, and down you go. P45 O-ring, same thing. We remove them, they look entirely flat, and some people actually won't even realize that there is an O-ring in the groove. You have to see a groove. The O-ring has to be there. Let's position there. I'm going back to original bolts. I'm not using anything that the customer used of aftermarket. I'm sure he had his reasons, but I just go back to whatever I know that should be on his machine, on a Pavoni machine, I should say. Okay, so once this is center, halfway, you just kind of judge it visually like so. And I wish I can see my 10 millimeters so I can tighten directly. Here it is. Okay, let's see, let's center. Just about. So. And so. Okay, before dealing with the rollers, the levers, and everything else on the groupet, I will normally address the side glass assembly. So stand by. Side glass. Clean, clean, clean. Make sure there is no sediment, any scale build up in the lower or upper assembly. New side glass. Gaskets, washers, and the upper Teflon gasket. Position gasket down, washer, side glass fitting just sitting there, the opposite above. Same steps, but opposite in the sense that they go up and down. At this point, this glass can slide in pretty easily sometimes, sometimes not. I use a little food grade silicone, just enough that will make it a little easier to slide through. Make sure that you are holding the upper pieces. I just like to keep them loose until I make sure that the glass is going partially in, especially for the lower. You need to also make sure that this assembly is lined up with the lower assembly, which sometime during shipping it could happen that they slightly get tweaked. And you will know, because when you're trying to insert a side glass, it will not line up and it will crack. So finger tight for now. Then take a 17, yes. Tight a little more. We'll go back to the leather. Teflon. Closing cap. Closing nut. And reaching for my fancy special tool. No, it's not. Just a wide, flat blade adapted from an old butcher knife. Okay, at this point in time, steam valve. The pin for this particular machine is just one of the push-in, so I normally use a very old screwdriver rounded up and a pin hammer, and I just push the pin through out of the way. This one gets replaced because it was actually leaking, and I don't like the way as the tip chewed up and of course scale build up. There are two washers here, which a lot of time they disappear and get thrown away because customers don't realize that there are washers. So one in each side. Rebuild. New shaft, washer, new P53 gasket, washer, and then I can say a rookie mistake because I remember doing it many times. This one gets put there before the knob. Then you put the knob, you line it up with a hole, like so. You take your pin, which if they're not rusted or such, you can still reuse yours. You start to push it through, make sure it's lined up. At this point in time, I normally go into my vise and with one side protected, one knob, I just push in, tap it a little bit, so it's flush, and that's your pin. To reinsert it, put a little abundantly some of the food grease on both threads. I start with this, then I start with that, and then I get to a point that simultaneously I screw them in. Again, we are just going finger tight for now, which is just about there. Then I do a little, oops, wrong side, 14, a little tightening. When we do the final testing, we know if it is too tight or not. It does feel a little tight, so I'll just back off a little bit. And that's taken care of. The safety valve, we decided that since it's perfectly functioning, we are not messing with it, which is one of those don't mess with it. If it's fixed, don't break it. Don't touch. Okay, little food grade. Check the stretch of the holes. Sometimes they get very, very stretchy and they can start to affect the traveling and the functioning of the piston. These ones are okay for a 1994 machine. Okay, so you saw me putting a little grease there. I'm putting the roller. I put a little grease also inside the roller. 2 pins, little grease. Lower holes facing down, like so. Start positioning. Push first pin in, take second pin, little grease. Pump a few times. Yes, the display, it is somewhat annoying, but if it's not affecting the function of the machine, then there is no point of replacing a fairly expensive part. Okay, I'm not putting the clip intentionally until the final testing. This Pavoni, apart the wand, the pin, of course the base, new knob, O-ring will be replaced, will be ready to test. Stand by for that. Okay, we are ready for the testing phase, or the initial testing phase of this machine. This is an old style 4-prong heating element with a 1 and 2 switch. So first you turn, of course, the main power on. If you have the switch on position 2, it will activate the larger wattage heating element to bring the machine up faster to temperature. If you have some kind of device that will read the power, let me see if it's even visible. Yeah, it will read an higher amperage draw, and vice versa. If I go to 1, it will read a low amperage draw. So we let the machine test. I'm expecting the pressure will reach about 0.5, 0.6 and start to ease and slow, starting to release pressure from the old style safety valve. Once that's tested and reached, we will switch to position 1. at that point in time, even before inserting a portafilter, or as you see, even finishing up retightening the side glass cover and put the cover, plastic cover on, we are waiting to see if there are no leaks. In fact, I'm detecting a small leak from the steam valve. The shaft was replaced, so we'll wait to see when pressure builds up. One thing that happened to this machine, which kind of explained the reason why I found two heating element gaskets and some little oddities as I was dismantling it, was it started to leak. When I first put water, there was a waterfall of water coming from underneath the machine. Check that, of course, I positioned the O-ring of the heating element properly, since I was trying to make a video as I was redoing it. And yes, indeed, it was. So I went further in the machine, I removed the flange, and realized that whomever did whatever they did, they had two spacers underneath the boiler, between the boiler and the base, plus one on the underneath between the base and the heating element flange. That caused enough of a spacing that the three bolts couldn't quite reach too tight, and that could be the reason, well, that most likely is the reason why they placed two different type of gaskets to compensate for that. So if somebody worked on your machine or you're buying a used one and you see this kind of situation happening, then no matter what, you cannot get a leak-free heating element, I will say check that. Make sure that there are only one spacer each. And speaking of spacers, for a period of time on the market, some other supplier was selling spacers that were slightly thicker. Those will create the same issue. They will not allow they will create a lot more spacing that will not eventually make the heating element flange and the heating element gasket to seal properly. Okay, this is the old style steam valve with the old wand. It's already been discussed with the customer that if replacing the gasket and the shaft, this valve will still leak. There is really nothing else that the customer wanted to invest into, so it stays that way for now. But here's another leak, something I didn't tie it properly. So basically I'm looking for leaks underneath from the heating element, steam valve, both location, front and back, and here you can tell it's leaking. Steam valve where it attaches to the boiler, side glass, group head to boiler, safety valve, which as you see, probably you can tell, it's already opening below 1, just like I was expecting. And now we start to open even further, because of course that's the job, is releasing pressure. At this point, the machine will get switched to 1, and when you have your portafilter inserted and you are ready to make a shot at that point, you can proceed with a shot. Because I'm testing the machine, of course I'm not even ready to do a final testing shot. But this is pretty much the procedure. Thank you for watching, and enjoy many shots out of your Pavoni old machine and new ones.